Welcome to Beacon Hill Beat, a legislative update with Senator Julian Sear. Senator Sear, it's been a long time since you've been in studio.
Since we've done it in studio. Look at these new lights. Apparently, they're LED lights, right? It's not as hot as it used to be in here.
Right, the halogens are making us
Look
sweat.
At this.
We've got a nice backdrop now, and
Congratulations, well deserved.
A studio that is here to inform our residents and give them information, let us talk to people, and pass along important things that are important to their quality of life.
Yeah.
Specifically, what's going on Beacon Hill? So there's, let's start at the beginning. Committee assignments,
Sure.
right?
So it's a new legislative session. A new session starts every January. And lots of big changes. We've sworn a new governor and lieutenant governor, which is very exciting, really making history, really all women leading the Commonwealth in all but one constitutional office. And so that was a heady, wonderful experience to be part of that change. We've begun our legislative work, setting up our rules, establishing committees. I was reappointed as the assistant majority whip, so I'm continuing in leadership at the leadership table, Senate President's leadership table. I'm the youngest member in leadership on the Oldie Millennial, so get to continue in that role, which is I think very important for this region to have. We have 8 of us who represent the Cape and Islands. We always work in a very collaborative, bipartisan way. But to have me at the leadership table in the Senate, State Representative Sarah Peak, who represents the Outer and Lower Cape, has long been in leadership in the House. That really helps us make sure that Cape Cod and island issues are at the table, are being considered. And then in committee appointments, so I've been the longtime chair of the Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery. This session, I'm going to continue as the vice chair of that committee. But I'm now the chair of the Joint Committee on Public Health for the Senate. So public health is an area that is one of the biggest committees in the legislature. Over 500 bills are assigned to it. I think the second most number of bills. And for viewers who followed my career, before running for state senate, I worked in public health. I worked for the Department of Public Health, for the state, and really public health is a sort of really core, just sort of a core passion and area where a lot of my public policy expertise is. So we're going to be sinking our teeth into lots of issues on public health, everything, from wellness to forever chemicals to, food issues to like a whole host of things in public health. It's a big diverse area, everything from, regulation to healthcare facilities to beaver trapping. So it's a big issue, lots of fun. Being thrilled to be co-chairing the committee with Marjorie Decker, who's a state representative from Cambridge, a longtime friend. She and I actually chaired the Mental Health Committee several sessions ago. So we've had a great working partnership and excited to roll up our sleeves. We'll have our first committee hearings in May and get to work and move as expeditiously as we can.
Right. So when we talk about committee assignments and, being part of those working groups, I guess you could call them, give the viewers a sense of what those types of committees, like what do they do? You just come up with stuff and then it goes back to somewhere else, or are you fashioning legislation that comes to the floor? Like, give us a sense of how they work.
So the committees are how we essentially evaluate, understand, and make decisions and refine legislation bills. So at the beginning of the session, one of the first things we do is file legislation. I filed 91 bills on a whole host of topics. There's over 8,000 bills that have been filed this legislative session. And those bills are all assigned to various committees. So if it's related to public health, it goes to the Public Health Committee. If it relates to small business, it goes to the Small Business Committee, on and on and on. And then we have hearings. Each bill is heard. It receives a public hearing. Typically, we group the topics. And so constituents and advocacy groups and fellow legislators come and testify on those bills. And then we make a determination on them. Bills can be favorably advanced. They can be unfavorably advanced, which is rather sort of uncommon, or they can be studied further. Basically, sent to study means we need some more time to look at the issue, but the bill doesn't advance. And so that's the first step in the legislative process. Once bills are advanced, then we they go to a second committee, either usually the Ways and Means Committee or Rules Committee, bills on third reading, and we sort of work to advance them to get to the floor for a vote. But committees really is where the action is, particularly on refining public policy. Maybe you got a bill that has some good merit, but there's an issue in how it's drafted, or it needs to be refined in this way, or adversely affects the stakeholder group. So if we change this language, we could advance it. So that's the work that we do in committee.
Okay. So let's go back to the 91 bills you filed. We don't have time for all of them, Senator, but we do.
I don't have time for them. Yeah, not this time. We'll get through them.
So when bills are filed, you can co-sponsor bills, or you can file them on your own. So you're coming up with your own ideas, or you're attaching your coattails to someone else's ideas. Yep. What are some of the bills that have been filed that are directly relating to some of the challenges we face here on Cape Cod?
So we focus on several big issues. Housing being one, forever chemicals being another, affordability issues like reform to the estate tax being a third. On housing, we've got a real housing crisis. Even here in the town of Barnstable, housing, the cost of a median home increased 28% in 1 year from 2021 to 2022. We're increasingly in a situation where, if you're not fortunate to yet own a home, right? And I'm in that boat too. You increasingly don't have a hope of being able to own a home here on Cape Cod. What that means for our workforce, what that means for millennials in my generation and people who are younger as well, very, very concerning. And the data show that this is putting tremendous strain on our workforce. Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce did a study. 40% of our workforce on Cape Cod is commuting over the bridges each and every day to work. And that percentage has increased pretty dramatically. So housing is absolutely important. We need to have zoning reform and changes to how we permit and what we allow to be built, and I have bills filed to that effect. So we also need a revenue stream to fund both, housing that we build and housing we preserve. So part of that is this idea of establishing a local option transfer fee on luxury real estate. This is a tool actually we've used on both Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard several decades ago to create land banks, right, to preserve and conserve land. So the idea is to establish a revenue stream that would enable a housing bank, if you will, that would occur in each town, or in the case of Martha's Vineyard, they want to have a region-wide housing bank. So I filed legislation to establish a transfer fee on luxury real estate, right? So on home sales over $2 million in a certain percentage, and that goes to the municipality to fund various housing initiatives. Yes, affordable housing. Yes, workforce housing. Also potentially could help people with down payment assistance or help with rent. Anything we can do to help keep people living here and staying in their homes. So that's been a big part of our focus this session. Really, I think if you look at this housing crisis, we've had a housing crisis here for 20 years. The pandemic, 30. I know, right? 23. I'm not. I've been around for all of it, right? I was that kid, Paula, who was like, coming home from middle school and reading the local paper after school. Right. That's what I did, right? And I remember reading about this crisis, right? And this was in the late 90s, early 2000s. This has persisted. We frankly haven't done a lot. And now we're really in this predicament where, particularly given the astronomical increase in home prices in the pandemic and its aftermath, we're in a real situation where the viability of our communities is really very much at threat. Right. You see this, in the extremities of the region, right? In my neck of the woods, on the Outer Cape, where I live, where the median home prices are over $1 million. You go to Nantucket, median home prices, even more than that, right? With housing out of reach for so many Cape Codders and Islanders, this is a problem we've got to solve. So we're trying to do our part at on Beacon Hill. I think there's real momentum around addressing housing affordability. Governor Healy, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll really are talking about this too. But we also need folks to have skin in the game here. And that means changing our zoning. That means building more densely. That means keeping up, all the good work Barnstable's been doing around wastewater projects. Barnstable's done a lot more than some other towns I represent. So this is what we really have to do to have any hope of, changing course on this dire housing crisis, which is adversely really affecting our workforce.
Right. housing goes hand in hand with a lot of infrastructure
Yep.
that's out there. And as you mentioned, Barnstable going through a 30-year project for wastewater. But there's other challenges around water, not necessarily wastewater, but forever chemicals, which is our drinking water. There are several federal, now new guidelines from the federal coming in. We had guidelines from the state. There's legislation being filed on these forever chemicals. Can you talk a little bit about that bill that's been filed?
Sure. I've been spending a lot of work on this issue. Actually, before even being elected to the state senate, I was working on forever chemicals, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, also known as PFAS, when I was at the Department of Public Health. And here in Barnstable, right, y'all have been dealing with this, particularly in the Hyannis Water District, but in other water districts as well, have been dealing with PFAS present in the water. And a lot of good work has been done in the town, I think, to address this. In some ways, we're ahead of the curve. But we've got a really big problem. The more you look for PFAS, the more you find it. Not only in drinking water and in groundwater sources, but also in clothing, in consumer products, in the packaging of the food that we eat. And the more you look at it, the more you realize this is really not good for human health. So several years ago, I worked with Representative Kate Hogan, who's the Speaker Pro Tem in the House, and we established an interagency task force on PFAS. We worked with a whole host of agencies and advocates and scientists to come up with a pretty comprehensive report, a roadmap around how we can address PFAS in Massachusetts. That now has become the Mass PFAS Act, which I have filed with Representative Kate Hogan. It would phase out the use of PFAS in most all consumer products, including food, clothing, packaging. By 2030, would phase out the use of PFAS in firefighter turnout gear by 2026. Would establish a trust fund where we would then work to put dollars both through appropriations and then also likely through settlements. Right, there's pending litigation against these corporations who've known for decades that the chemicals they're manufacturing have adverse health effects. Have a trust fund to help towns like Barnstable with these costs, and there's a lot more sort of pieces to this. So. We're working in a pretty comprehensive way. I feel there's momentum on this issue. The Senate President talked about PFAS in her beginning of the year speech. So something we've been working very diligently on and hoping we can further deliver. There was a great forum here in Barnstable over the weekend that I spoke at. I think over 75 people were there. So this is an issue to be really vigilant on, and one I'm hoping we can get done this session.
Right, and it's fluid. We don't know a lot about what these chemicals do to our bodies, and there's an ongoing testing through Silent Spring.
I really want to encourage people to participate in this. So Silent Springs received federal funding to do sort of longer-term testing, looking at and sampling, looking at what, if any, are the adverse health effects associated with PFAS. It's a great, wonderful program. We really should urge people to tap into it. I think they're still enrolling people.
They are.
So check
May,
it out through May.
Yep.
Yeah, I visited.
Yep.
I think that this biomonitoring is really important to particularly give us specific recommendations. We know that people who are pregnant or who are nursing should be particularly concerned about PFAS exposure. But with emerging contaminants, a concern like PFAS, typically the more you learn about it, the more concerned we are.
So 2 really big bills out of the 91. What are your focus as you're coming into the second part of this season? So you got your feet wet January. We're heading into April now.
The next big thing's the budget, right?
Right.
So the House is going to take up the FY24 budget in April. Us in the Senate will do this in May. The governor proposed a budget, released that actually several weeks ago on March 1st. So we're really sinking our teeth into the budget. I think the fiscal environment here is a little different than it was in the last several years. Revenues were sort of extraordinarily strong, unexpectedly. So I think at the outset of the pandemic, I remember us all thinking, wow, this is going to be really painful and we're not going to have a lot of resources. There was a tremendous amount of resources that came from the federal government. We've worked really hard to deploy those dollars, American Rescue Plan dollars, on everything from housing, $400 million on mental health, which we didn't talk about today, but I've spent a lot of time working on mental health. and then in addition, the revenues were strong. I think revenues now have plateaued and have dipped a little bit. So I think we're cautiously anticipating, is a recession possible? How to prepare for that? The good news is we've been very strong fiscal stewards. The state's rainy day fund has over $6 billion in it. So we're prepared to weather those storms, but I think we're trying to figure out how to be judicious. And then how do we make changes, and even a tax reform package that we tried to get passed last session that help working families continue to make a life here, whether that's expanding, the earned income child tax credit or other sort of tax credits. I've been working to update the estate tax, which probably is a progressive tax, but the threshold at sort of $1 million is affecting, some Cape families. Many of our families, right? My family's kind of in this boat where, maybe you bought a house for $50,000 or $80,000 quite a long time ago. Now its value has accrued to the point where you might actually end up tripping the estate tax. Right. But for families who may be land rich but cash poor, how do we update the estate tax so that we're not unfairly burdening working families, but still also asking those of tremendous privilege to chip in. So just sort of a smattering of the issues we're working on. But it's really nice to be here in person, no longer on Zoom. Enjoying this, this updated facility. So congratulations.
So our first Ospreys this weekend, so we know that the season is on its way.
It is.
So we thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to getting updates more frequently now that the studio's up and running and the HD channel will be up and running.
Oh, I know.
As well.
I'm going to have to... HD, Paul.
Right, there may be hair and makeup the next time you're here. So I just want to thank our viewers. This is Beacon Hill Beat with Senator Julian Cyr.